I mean, this is what I was mentioning. I mean, the whole idea of insolvency code was to, how quickly a revival can be done. And I mean, prior to 2016, over last 15 years, we have accumulated huge amount of, what I call the non-performing assets. Whatever, we did not recognize the NPAs at the right time. We have not resolved them. We allowed them to continue. Based on some estimate, it was around 20 lakh crores, which was stuck in the non-performing assets. And, that was another reason, which made government to think about bringing a modern insolvency regime. I mean, first time in a legislation, we found to promote entrepreneurship as an objective, which is very, very welcoming feature. Traditionally, the government and business are two sides of the table. Somehow there was no trust, and always people think businessman is using the resources but is not giving back to the government or the society. But the first time, the IBC code recognizes the promotion of entrepreneurship as one of the objectives to bring out this law. I mean, we have the Mr. MS Sahu, the chairman of IBBI. I mean, he kind of articulated, what is the objective of this insolvency. If you look at, market needs 3 stages of business to start a business. How quickly, how freely one can enter the business, and how to continue the business. Fair competition. Every business needs a fair competition, fair play, and that's another very fundamental thing for the business. Third important thing is the free exit, how quickly you can exit if you are not interested to continue the business. Friends, I mean, prior to this law, the insolvency bankruptcy code, we had multiple laws dealing with the insolvency of the corporates, insolvency of the individuals, insolvency of the partnership firms. So plethora of laws and very, very poor implementation. It was taking huge amount of time. Therefore, the government has brought in this new law in 2016. So I'm not getting into more detail there. But fundamentally, a lot of things have changed in the new law versus what was the earlier regime. I mean, we keep hearing about Chapter 11 in the US. Chapter 11, company has filed Chapter 11 in the US, means they have filed for the insolvency. I mean, Chapter 11, kind of a model we have adopted in India. There are few things which are, which comes out very, very clearly, which are very, very important. That's the whole architecture. There is one, I mean, if you look at it, the SIC company and what is the test to be decided a company is an insolvent or not. Earlier it was erosion of capital. If your entire capital is eroded, then you would be, treated as, an insolvent company or a SIC company. But now we have adopted a default. If for any creditor you are not able to pay and there is a default, that is a trigger for dragging that particular creditor into insolvency. I mean, the default means obviously there are issues in terms of cash flow. For businesses, cash flow is very, very important. It is not the sales and receivables, but those receivables are converting into cash or not. World over now, how are you tracked as a business? Are you making enough cash? How are your cash flows? I mean, sales and receivables are important, but cash is much more important. So what we have brought in, it is default test. If you are not able to pay to the creditors, there is a default. Therefore, one can be dragged into insolvency. That is one fundamental thing which has happened. Second, most importantly, even if the company is not doing well and they are not able to service to the creditors, under the old regime, the control continues to be with the same management, same equity holder. They would go back to the RBI, they would go back to their lenders and say that, you give us the restructuring and then, we will rework, we are putting some money, we will revive and, we will pay back your money. So that was one, big concern the lenders, large, lenders like banks and financial institutions had. The same people who did not perform, again, we are allowing them to run the companies and the management. That's where now in this regime, the control is moving to the creditors from to the debtors. To the earlier equity holders, the control is moving to the creditors. Again, very, very path-breaking change which has happened. That's the second very important thing. Third important thing, as I mentioned, I mean, whenever there is an insolvency or a liquidation, I mean, the whole thing is you have say, limited resources available, but your dues and credits are a lot more. You have 100 rupees, but your creditors are say 1,000 rupees. How do we distribute? Who should get first? Prior to this, government had a priority. Government dues, taxes had a priority, but now government has taken a back seat. Their dues are pari passu with the unsecured loans. The secured loans and the employees have taken a priority. The government has given up so much and given the lenders, the other creditors, lot of weightage. Government dues have taken a back seat. I mean, these are the 3-4 major things which have happened in the new regime. So as I said, this insolvency bankruptcy code, now we have only one single legislation to cover all kinds of entities, either legal entities or a person, individuals, either individuals, HUF, partnership firms, LLPs, limited companies, all of them follow this insolvency and bankruptcy code. Everything is consolidated now. Today, for the companies and LLPs, the insolvency code is notified. For the individuals, it is not notified. And the partnership firms also, it is not notified. The whole idea is companies and LLPs will go through the National Company Law Tribunal, the judicial authority. And in the case of individuals, HUFs and partnership firms, it will be debt recovery tribunal. I mean, that's the legal forum where these insolvency cases can be filed and resolved. I mean, the way this whole act and the entire ecosystem has built in, fantastic ecosystem has built in. I mean, we have the SEBI, IRDA, Competition Commission. I mean, they have evolved over the years, and we have taken all that experience. We have created five foundational pillars for success of whole insolvency regime. We have regulator called IBBI, Insolvency and Bankruptcy Board of India. Who is responsible for implementation of this law, regulating the insolvency professional. I mean, the adjudicating authority doesn't mean is the a quasi-judicial court, where these insolvency matters can be filed. In the case of corporates, it is National Company Law Tribunal. They have 15 plus benches all over India. That is where these matters can be filed. And the insolvency professional agencies, I mean, I was mentioning about the creditor control, from debtors control, equity holders control to the creditors control. I mean, creditors, there are multiple creditors, they have their own job to do it. That's where the government felt there should be an independent professional who should have a control of this, insolvent company during the process, where the process can be run independently and the insolvency resolution can be achieved. That is where a new professional called insolvency professional is, brought in, and insolvency professional agencies are regulated. And there is an information utility, again a wonderful scheme. I mean, the whole idea is we should not spend time on whether the amount is due to particular debtor or not, whether creditor needs to pay or not. So let's have a third party independent a body. That's where entire credits are registered, a loan is registered, payments, dues are registered. If there is a default, automatically it should enable the admission of case into insolvency. We should not spend time on who is right and what is the right amount and all that kind of thing. Friends, I just wanted to talk about 3-4 concepts which are very, very important in the company kind of a structure. Today we are only going to cover corporate insolvency. We are not going to get into the liquidation and so many other things. The coverage would be only on the corporate insolvency. From a corporate insolvency perspective, there are few definitions, few fundamental things. The whole law makes creditors into broadly 3 categories. One is financial creditor, then an operational creditor, and the other creditors who do not fall under the financial and operational creditors. Now, what do we mean by financial creditor? I mean, anybody who lends money, who has given money, is considered as a financial creditor. Every bank giving working capital, term loan, lease finance, hire purchase, discounting, factoring, all these are kind of a financial creditor. So what they have given, they have given money, which has a time value of money. So they are called as a financial creditor. Now we have the second category is called operational creditor. Who is operational creditor? any creditor, I mean, any business or an individual who supplies goods or services to the business is called an operational creditor. Your employees, where you need to pay salaries, they are operational creditor. Government dues are operational creditor. Your supplier, raw material supplier is an operational creditor. Your landlord is an operational creditor. Your consultant who is providing services is an operational creditor. Now, which is not falling in these two categories goes to the third category, which is not very important. Now, so we have the financial creditor and operational creditor who are putting, their resources to work even of your business. Now, there is a lot of weightage given to the financial creditor. What law thought, the government thought is financial creditors are smarter people, and generally, I mean, financial creditors includes banks, NBFCs, your term lending institutions who have put money in your business. They know better. Therefore, they should be given more power in terms of resolving the insolvency. They understand the finance, they understand your business. They should be given more authority to resolve the resolution. So that is how all the financial creditors, becomes part of the committee of creditors, who are in control along with the resolution professional in the process of insolvency resolution. So that's how the financial creditors have a lot of say in the resolution of the insolvency. So when does the insolvency gets triggered? As I said, you need to pay some amount to the creditor, and there is a default. Now earlier it was 1 lakh rupees. Now that is enhanced to 1 crore. For any creditor, there is a due of 1 crore or more, and if you are not able to pay that creditor, that amounts to default. That default gives a right to creditor to initiate the insolvency. I mean, that's how the whole triggering of insolvency happens. As I said, creditors, we have financial and operational creditors. I mean, I'm not going to spend too much of time on this slide. How can they initiate? What is the process? I think some of it my colleague Prashant will cover. This is very, very important. Assuming there is a and who files for a insolvency and the company gets admitted into insolvency. Now these things happen. Now what are those things which happen? From the day the order is issued, company assumed that it has got into an insolvency. Now the existing board of directors powers get suspended. Immediately with the order, all the powers get suspended. Their duties continue, powers get suspended. So that's very, very important in terms of operation of the bank account, everything. So all the powers of the board of directors get suspended. That's one. Second, entire control moves to the insolvency professional, who is also called as a resolution professional. Now, along with the order, an individual, a qualified insolvency professional is appointed to resolve the insolvency. I'm also a qualified insolvency professional. I qualified in early 2017. Last 3 years, handling few matters. Very recently, I started handling one of the Lanco subsidiary, a company called Lanco Hoskote Tollway, a 80-kilometer toll in Bangalore, which is funded by, which is a concessionaire from NHAI. This SBI is the main lender. I've been handling that matter. We have a resolution. Now the resolution plan is approved, kind of filed with the NCLT for their approval. So there is a resolution amount of 200 crores. I mean, so that's how the resolution plan happens. So we've been handling those matters. So from the insolvency commencement date, the entire management and control rests with this resolution professional. He is deemed to be a CEO. He has to take the calls. He has to work with the existing management people, and if there is an ongoing business, he has to see that business is continued, and he should be on the top of everything and see that the value of assets are protected, the business is going concern, all of that. Then another very, very important thing, see, when we say the insolvency, I mean, we are not able to meet both the ends in terms of cash flow. I have limited cash flow, but my expenditure is more, my liabilities are more. So the whole idea of insolvency is, let us give 6 to 9 months time. Can we resolve, this insolvency, put back this company into normal mode so that the company continues and the employees continues. We have given a fresh life to this company. That is the whole idea. But when obviously in situation like that, there are number of creditors, coming after this company asking for the money. So in that kind of a situation, resolution is not possible. Therefore, you have to have a moratorium. From the day the insolvency gets commenced, all recovery proceeding gets stayed. No court cases, whatever cases which are filed, which get stayed. All civil cases for recovery of money against the company get stayed. If there are any criminal cases, all that can go on, but the civil cases for recovery of money from the company get stayed. If the company is paying some EMIs, installments, interest, all that gets stayed. So that's where there is a breathing time. It's kind of giving oxygen to the company for 6 to 9 months, so that you can figure out how to resolve this company, what input is required, what resources are required, how do you settle the existing creditors and all that. That's where the moratorium is very, very important. This is a wonderful tool which is incorporated. And also, whole idea is not to kill the company, not that it should go into liquidation. We should see that business is continued and going concern, and then it is passed on to a resolution applicant or whoever acquires. Therefore, it is possible that there are some critical services and goods which this business requires are continued. Law provides, if today the electricity is very essential for running my business, so the electricity department cannot disconnect overnight if the company goes into insolvent. They need to support. So that's how the whole architecture is made, to see that company is alive. It's a going concern, so that a better resolution can be achieved. That's what is the effect of corporate once the company gets into insolvency. Couple of more things needs to be understood. It is not a litigation. Insolvency proceeding is not a litigation between one party against the other party. It is a status. It is a process. Company is going through an insolvency that has to be resolved. An application may be filed by one creditor, but once the company is admitted into insolvency, so it doesn't matter who has filed the application. The process is remain same. Who will get what and what is the process is remain same. Now, one more thing which we need to understand: there are only 3 outcomes once company gets admitted into insolvency. One outcome is, ideal outcome is the resolution. We have a time given, within 180 to 80 days, a resolution has to be achieved, and whoever is successful resolution applicant, the company goes to him. That's an ideal outcome of the insolvency process. That's a resolution. Through resolution, a new management comes, take over the company. That's option 1. If there is no resolution, obviously what we are saying, and there is no prospective applicant or a resolution applicant ready, no buyer is ready to take over the company and run it. Therefore, if there is no resolution, the company will go into liquidation. The company which is going through insolvency will go into a liquidation. But there is also another way out. Sometimes it may so happen that the company got into insolvency, not able to pay the money. But in some situations, the promoter may be able to withdraw the case. You can pay applicant whatever amount is due to him, or settle with him, and with the consent of 90% of creditors, 90% of committee of creditors. That's called COC. If the applicant who has filed the case as well as the 90% of COC agrees for the withdrawal, the company can come out of the insolvency. So these are the 3 outcomes. Once company gets gets into insolvency, only these are the 3 ways it can come out. Initially we did not have withdrawal process, but subsequently it has been introduced. That's how insolvency process runs. Yeah. This is again little more detailed in the process is concerned. Once the company is admitted into insolvency, the resolution professional, what does the resolution professional has to do? What is the resolution process? What is the resolution mechanism? The whole idea is this insolvency professional has to collate all the claims from various creditors, whoever is the, whoever could be the creditor, government, your landlord, employees, bankers, everybody, whoever needs to get money from this company, they have to lodge their claims, and the resolution professional has to get the, all the assets value to see what is the fair value of the company, what is the liquidation value of the company. Then he has to run the resolution process, identify a resolution applicant who would be interested to acquire this company, right? So that's the resolution process. Now, when the resolution applicant comes in, he will look at it. I mean, what is the total, claim today? What are the assets today? What is the fair value today? And how much he is willing to pay? I mean, this is what, a lot of people, may get surprised, or, sometimes may not get it, over a period of time, these liabilities gets accumulated. With the time value of money, if you are not servicing those loans, within the due date, there is a compounding effect, interest on interest, a principal of 100 could become, 500, maybe in, 7-8 years. So you have the huge, claims, entire creditor sitting, but your asset value is very less. You have 1,000 crores of debt, and today your asset value is, 200 crore. What do we do? If you are a buyer, what would you do? If there is a 200 crore asset and the potential of business, how much money this business can make, what kind of returns that can give it, on your investment, you will offer. You will offer, if there is a 200 crore asset, maybe I'll offer 150 crores, or maybe I'll offer 220 crores. But you have a debt of 1,000 crores. What do you do? So there is no shortcut. I mean, what we are looking at, we are looking two different things. One, there are liabilities which got accumulated over a period of time. If those liabilities have not been serviced, rupee becomes 3 rupees over, 3, 4, 5 years. But your asset values remain same. You are not being able to service. So that is where this concept called haircut. So you have creditors of 1,000 crores, you have assets of 200 crores. Your resolution plan could be of, maybe 220 crores, 180 crores, something like that. When this money comes, so you need to distribute to, 1,000 crores creditors. Obviously, they are going to get 20% of it. This is what we are seeing, in most of the cases. I mean, reasons are plenty. I mean, couple of reasons. One, your business has become very unviable, because of the competition. You are not operating at a particular capacity. Therefore, you are not making money. You are not able to pay. Second, there is a cost overrun, the capacity utilization, external factors. Maybe in some situations, maybe, money has been, siphoned off, those kind of reasons where today there is a mismatch between the liability and the assets and the value of the business. That is where these haircuts are happening. They're happening in big time, and, particularly in the world economy companies. And that's how it is. I mean, as a buyer, what will you do? You can't pay, 1,000 crores. There is no value. Value is, say, 200 crores. I mean, that's how the resolutions are happening. I mean, in India, the whole thing is, when I keep saying this, though we have lot of listed companies, even in the listed companies, except maybe top 100, 200 companies, rest all are run like a family concerns and proprietary concern. The professionalism, the professionalization of management, institutionalization of management is lesser. There are companies with 500 crores, 1,000 crores, 2,000 crores. They can be run by a single promoter, a family. But if those businesses have to, through resolution have to go to somebody else, they are not comfortable. Besides what is available on the table, there's a lot of, IP, know-how related to the business, which is not systemized, which is available only with the individual. So what today, there's also a problem we are facing. We don't have enough buyers to buy these test assets. These companies like Jet Airways, today we don't have buyer. We have 1 or 2 buyers. An operating company dragged into, insolvency. It's more than 2 years. I mean, we don't have a resolution applicant, resolution plan. I mean, there are also challenges in terms of delays which are happening in the system. But that's the reality. So we are not ready from an investor's perspective. where, there are a lot of investor interest to acquire these stressed assets. Today, that is the problem we are facing. More number of companies going into liquidation because the resolutions are not happening. As I was telling, the committee of creditor constituting the financial creditors have a voting right. I mean, their voting right depends upon the amount of credit, an amount of outstanding money to them, and this is the body decides various activities, various decisions, and the RP, resolution professional, with the committee of creditors have to run this resolution process. This is what the moratorium I was referring to. When the company gets admitted into insolvency, all recovery proceeding gets stayed. So that's a good thing, so that a resolution can happen. What is the liability and how to resolve in a peaceful manner, than everybody is trying to drag the company into multiple ways. This is what I was talking, we don't have enough interest and enough investors available for bidding for these assets. That's where I was giving the Jet Airways example. Besides that, when the law was made, the government has prohibited existing promoters taking over their own companies in the insolvency process. Under your leadership, the company went into bad, the NPA, it is gone into insolvency. Therefore, you should not be allowed to bid for your own company and take it. The idea was, debts are 1,000 crores in the resolution. Maybe you are trying to acquire for 100 crore, 200 crores based on the real value. So government thought it should not be allowed. While we said, in the objective, promotion of entrepreneurship, let the entrepreneur fail and come back and start afresh. But the prohibiting the existing promoters in taking over their own companies in the resolution process it was a little counterintuitive. But there are also valid reasons. I mean, there is one set of thinking which says a lot of these promoters did not do fair thing. I mean, they would have misused or siphoned the funds. Therefore, they should not be allowed to take over the companies. But there are also decent number of promoters and businesses which have gone into insolvency. Not because of their reason. There are external reasons. I mean, there are where the government is the biggest customer, either the road, railways, or the construction or a gas power plants, where the government has awarded the contract, money has been put in. Today, gas is not available. I mean, there is no fault of promoter. The company is going into insolvency. But if he is capable of bidding and taking over those companies, why should we stop? So we are trying to paint everybody with the same brush. Which again because of that, again the number of liquidations have gone up because the existing cannot bid. That's the issue. But government has banned, and then subsequently they have relaxed. Now government says if there's an MSME companies, they can take over it. Now that's a little better. But what ideally we should do? I mean, if there is a bad appeal, if somebody has cheated public money and with their wrongdoings, they should be punished. They should be should not be allowed to take over their companies. But there are companies which are, I mean, the companies failed because of external reason, not because of the promoter. They should be allowed to bid their own companies. That's where there can be more resolution than the liquidation. I mean, this confusion is still going on. This restriction is still there. Government is revisiting on it. Maybe we will have some better solution on this. So one way to look at it, a company acquired, through a resolution process, in one way, in a lighter way, what we say, the company has undergone a Ganga Snan, means all pap vimukt ho gaya abhi, and one can start a clean slate. All your liabilities, your problems, your overdues, your defaults, all goes off, and there is an insulation, there is an immunity from all prior liabilities and the defaults, and the resolution applicant is starting on a fresh start. That's how the immunity comes. This is what what the the resolution applicant wants. Fine, I am willing to buy this asset, but I don't drag me for the earlier defaults. There was some default, some violation. Don't drag me. So that's how initially there was not much clarity, but there is a absolute clarity today. Getting insulation from the prior defaults, either civil or criminal. This is where I think JSW Power has been fighting. I think the government quickly amended, brought this insulation and immunity provision in the IBC so that resolution applicants are protected. So they get it on clean slate. That's the idea. This is another very important feature of the new insolvency and bankruptcy code. This is what I was telling. If you have less money available but your creditors are more, how do you distribute? Who gets what? This is the order of priority, and we also call it as a waterfall mechanism. Whatever money is available, first it is appropriated towards the insolvency resolution and liquidation cost. Then it goes to the workman dues. Workman dues and secured lenders get pari passu. They have an equal rate, right? In proportion to the amount, they get the second priority. Third priority, employee dues. Then the unsecured financial creditor. Then the government. Then the remaining dues. Then the preference. Then the equity shareholders. This is again, this is again world gold standard now in terms of how does money gets distributed in the liquidation. This is what world is following. We have also adopted this. Yeah. These are the some of the companies. We call it is large 12 NPAs around 2016, 2017, dirty dozen kind of thing. People used to call it around 3.45 lakh crores, 3.45 lakh crores. Almost 25-30% of entire NPAs are with these 12 large groups, Videocon to Lanco to the Electro Steel, Bhushan Steel, all of them. All of them got initiated insolvency somewhere in 2017-18. So 8 matters got resolved, and then still another 4 needs to be resolved. Another very important feature of this law was when it was envisaged, time-bound resolution. We thought 180 days plus 90, in 270 days we should achieve a resolution so that without losing the value of the business and asset, this can transition to a new buyer or a resolution applicant. But due to a lot of litigation which has happened, and then the adjudicating authority, which is National Company Law Tribunal, lack of their benches or the the support system with the NCLTs, the humongous number of cases got filed, and which is making disposal of the matters at their end a bigger task. So therefore we are not able to achieve the resolution in 270 days. It is taking more. It is taking 2 times of 270 days. So that's one one area which needs to be fixed immediately. You guys see this these matters here. If you see the realization in the Electro Steel, 40% is realized, and Alok Industries is in 17%. SR Steel got a very good recovery, is around 82-83% recovery. Yeah. So this is the status as of now. There's a spelling mistake here. Admitted. There are there are more, around 4,000 matters have been filed and admitted. Filed is humongous. Filed could be maybe 2x, 3x of admitted. If 4,000 matters are admitted, maybe another 10,000 matters would have been filed. They have been settled before the admission. Yeah, I think Prashant also will cover that. How does that help? The debtor. So out of 4,000 which got admitted, around 600 got settled. After the admission, people have realized, I can pay off the creditor. So 600 got resolved. Now, in 250 cases, it resulted in a resolution. And liquidation is 950 companies. So for every one resolution, there are 4 companies going into liquidation. What it is making, obviously, when there is a liquidation, we are dismantling the company, we are selling assets in piecemeal, people are losing jobs and all of that. So besides the GST, demonetization, even IBC also contributed a little bit losing jobs and, all of that. Still, there are 2,100 matters which are going through, insolvency. I mean, majority of them, are beyond 1 year. What was originally anticipated in terms of, 270 days, things are not happening. This is the broadly, how the way the whole corporate insolvency mechanism operates. Maybe I'll start and let my colleague Prashant, take over. And then we will take those Q&A session, and I will be happy to answer all your questions. Prashant, you can start. Yeah.
Is my presentation visible?
It's visible. Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks. Sir. So the coverage of my presentation would be basically to give a clarity on how a corporate insolvency process can be triggered against a corporate, and if a creditor wants to recover their money, which is basically on a company, what is the process? So as Ravi said, basically there are two types of creditors: financial creditor and operational creditor. And here the insolvency code and individuals, the code is not yet notified, but for company and LLPs, the code is notified and added through Executive National Tribunal. So my presentation will be focusing more on the insolvency process, which is for a corporate debtor. So when I say corporate debtor, it could be a company or LLP. So that would be the coverage of my presentation. So just to give you insight and just to take a clue from Raghu's presentation. So there are two types of creditors: financial creditor and operational creditor. So as we all know, financial creditor means anybody who has lended money to the company. It could be a financial institution, bank, or an NBFC, or any unsecured loan given by any individuals or body corporates. That is predominantly called as a financial creditor. And operational creditor generally is a person who has supplied goods or provided services to the corporate debtor. So in case if a financial creditor or an operational creditor wants to trigger insolvency process against a corporate debtor, then they can basically decide whether they want to go under the insolvency code or they want to move to a commercial code. So generally, before anybody decides whether they want to go to NCLT by triggering the insolvency code against the corporate debtor, or they should move to commercial codes, they generally think, if I am advising them, I will generally see what is the financial stability of the company, how the company is currently doing, what is the liquidity value of the company. If the company is completely in mess, maybe triggering an insolvency process could be a blessing in disguise for the corporate. So it is very, very important that before anybody triggers the insolvency code against a corporate debtor, they understand that the financial stability of the company. So it is very, very difficult to get the financial stability of the company from a public domain, but if possible, before triggering any insolvency proceedings, it's always better that we understand how the financial position of the corporate debtor is, and then we'll trigger. Because sometimes what happens is, once you have triggered and filed an application, it becomes blessing in disguise for the corporate, and the company gets admitted, and the entire cost of the insolvency process is initial cost of the insolvency process is on the creditor who has invoked the insolvency proceeding. So it is very important that people understand it's not that just for the sake of invoking and then creating pressure on the corporate, people invoke corporate insolvency process. So before invoking, if informally, if anybody can get an insight how the financial stability of the company, what is the financial position of the company, that would help. So just to give you insight, what is the process of invoking the insolvency process? So what happens is, once you have determined that whether you are a financial creditor or operational creditor, then there is a process which is given under the insolvency code. For financial creditor, directly an application can be filed with the National Company Law Tribunal of the jurisdiction of the corporate debtor. So if the corporate debtor who owes money to, for example, to me, if I want to invoke insolvency proceedings against the corporate debtor, I need to file the application with the National Company Law Tribunal of the jurisdiction of the corporate debtor. So if a company which is in Maharashtra, they own money to me, so I need to file an application in NCLT Bombay. If it is in Telangana, then I have to file in NCLT Hyderabad. If it's in Tamil Nadu, I have to file in NCLT Chennai. So that has to be determined where you need to file the application. So once you have filed if you are a financial creditor, you directly file the application with the NCLT. But if you are an operational creditor, then you have to first issue a demand notice. So there is a specific format given under the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code. What should be the format of demand notice? That the demand notice is sent to the corporate debtor demanding the money, and they have been under the code they are given 10 days to reply. And once if they reply and if they dispute, fine. If even though if they dispute, you can still go ahead and then you have to file the application with the NCLT. So for financial creditor, no demand notice. For operational creditor, there has to be a demand notice. There is a cooling off period of 10 days. After that, the application can be filed. So before you file an application, there are three major criteria which have to be understood before we trigger the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code. One, there has to be a debt. So as I said, whether you are a financial creditor or operational creditor, you have to determine that. Once you have determined that you are a financial creditor or operational creditor, then you have to see whether there is any dispute. So if there is any dispute, so there is a what you call definition of dispute under the Insolvency Code. So if there is a dispute, then you cannot go to NCLT, because NCLT is an adjudicating authority. They will not get into the merits of the case. They will only see whether there is a debt and whether that is payable or not. If there is a dispute, then that dispute has to be settled in the civil court, commercial courts, or high court. But if there is no dispute and if there is a debt and there is a threshold, so currently the threshold is that the amount should be equal or more than 1 crore. It cannot be below 1 crore. So if it is 1 lakh, then you cannot trigger the insolvency process. The due should be at least 1 crore. Prior to lockdown, which is March 25th, the limit under the code was 1 lakh. But after the lockdown and after this pandemic, the government has decided that a lot of companies will go into default, and maybe there could be chances that a lot of people who are creditors for less than 1 crore or maybe owning 5 lakhs, 10 lakhs, they will trigger insolvency process against corporate debtor. So they have increased the limit from 1 lakh to 1 crore. So earlier it was 1 lakh, now it is 1 crore. So these are the three conditions. There has to be a debt, there should not be any dispute, and the amount should be either 1 crore or more. It cannot be below 1 crore. So if these three ingredients are there, then as creditor, you have a choice whether you want to move to commercial court or you want to go to NCLT. So if you have decided that you want to go to NCLT, subject to whatever I have just now explained, that what is the financial position of the company, all that, then maybe if you have decided that you want to move to NCLT, then an application can be filed. So if it's an operational creditor, then issue a demand notice, then move towards the application. If it's a financial creditor, then it can directly file the application with the respective NCLT. So I think we have already discussed what is a financial debt and operational debt. So this is the minimum amount. It should be at least 1 crore, and it can be triggered against a company or a LLP. So once the application is filed, the respective NCLT would number the application, and that application would be placed before the bench, and the matter will come for hearing. So on the day of matter, generally what happens is a notice is issued to the corporate debtor that there is an application which has been filed against the corporate debtor for invocation of insolvency proceedings against the corporate debtor. So once the notice is sent to the corporate debtor by the NCLT, the corporate debtor generally appoints a lawyer who will come and represent. So what happens is if you are filing a commercial suit in a court, then there's a process wherein you file a commercial suit, the other party files a counter, you file rejoinder, then the court hears the application on the merits, they dispose of. But here the process is same, wherein you file an application, it gets listed, the other party send the notice. Then if the other side believes that they don't owe you any money or there's a dispute, they will file a counter. Then if you have further points for submission, you will file a rejoinder. Then the court will hear. Once the pleadings are completed, the court will hear, and then court will decide whether the company should the application should be should be admitted or rejected. So when the court is deciding whether the application should be admitted or rejected, there are only three factors they will put their mind, because NCLT is not a court, it's an adjudicating authority. So they only will see whether there is a debt due, whether there is a dispute, or and the amount is more than 1 crore. So if there is a dispute, then the application will get rejected. if there is no dispute and the debt is crystallized and the NCLT believes that there is no doubt that there is a debt and there is no dispute, then they will admit the application. So after admission, I think Raghu has already explained what happens. So this is the process of NCLT and taking a company into insolvency if a creditor wants to invoke insolvency and bankruptcy code against the corporate debtor. Just to give you a flavor, as Raghu said, there is a time-bound process when the company goes into insolvency. So under the code, either the company has to get into liquidation or it has to revive within the specified timelines. For generally for all the companies, 330 days, but for some companies, are small companies or startups or whose assets are below certain threshold which have been given under the law, the resolution process is generally completed within 135 days. Either the company will pass the CIRP test or it will go into liquidation. Now the other question is, once the company is admitted, what happens? So as Raghu said, the company is basically getting a moratorium. So what does moratorium means? Moratorium means if there are any applications which are pending with different courts against the company, it could be a civil suit, it could be under civil suit, it could be a recovery matter, it could be any other matter, all those will be stayed and there cannot be any other proceedings which can go against the company. The only thing which has to be understood here is in case if there are any criminal cases against the directors or the company. So criminal cases are not part of the moratorium. All civil courts are, civil cases are part of the moratorium. So moratorium is given to the company when the company is admitted under the insolvency and bankruptcy code. But for the criminal case could be a check bouncing case, or there could be other criminal cases against the company, against the directors. Those will continue. Those cases will not have any moratorium, but all the civil cases will have the moratorium. So this is one of the relief which is given to the corporate, because the entire purpose of this code is to revive the company, make sure that company is getting the value which it should get. So there should not be any left, right, center cases filed against the company when the company is going under CRP. So the code gives a moratorium, and for criminal cases there is no moratorium. Now, sometimes what happens is when a corporate debtor borrows money, there are a lot of guarantors to the corporate debtor. It could be a personal guarantee given by the directors, individuals, shareholders, or it could be a corporate guarantee given by a group company. So when the corporate debtor goes bad in terms of paying their loans, there are two things. One, the financial creditor can go against the corporate debtor, but if there is a guarantee given against for the corporate debtor, then they can also go against the corporate debtor. So they can go against the corporate guarantor. So and not a personal guarantor. So the moratorium which is given under the code is only for the corporate debtor. So in case if there are guarantees which have to be invoked by the financial creditor against the corporate guarantor and the personal guarantor, they are free to do that. So for a personal guarantor, they can go to DRT, and for a corporate guarantor, again, if they want to come under the NCLT code and they want to invoke guarantee on the corporate guarantor under the code, they can come into NCLT or they can go to DRT. So the moratorium is only for the corporate debtor. In case of any guarantees given on behalf of corporate debtor by any corporate guarantors or personal guarantors, there is no moratorium. The cases against the corporate guarantors and personal guarantors can go in the suitable jurisdiction. It could be DRT or NCLT or any other court. Now, before invoking insolvency and bankruptcy code, just to give you some insights, before the code was implemented, generally what happened was, in case if there are financial creditors like banks, financial institutions, NBFC, if they have lent money to any company, they will take specific charge or mortgage of specific properties. So in case if the company goes bad, earlier the banks used to go to DRT, they used to invoke SARFAESI, and they used to take the assets under control, and they used to do bidding. Now for banks, before they go for recovery proceedings, they have to understand whether they have to invoke SARFAESI or they have to invoke the insolvency bankruptcy code. So under SARFAESI, the advantage which you have is if you are a lender who has a specific charge on certain assets of the company, you can attach them, you can sell them, you can do a bidding for those assets, and you can recover your money. But under insolvency, what happens is, when the company has gone into insolvency, the entire pool of assets of that corporate debtor is controlled by the COC, and based on the waterfall mechanism, you will get your money. So if for example, if there are 40 crores assets which are part of the asset pool of the company, and if there is a 20 crore asset which is specifically given to a lender. Now that lender has to decide what will happen when he triggers either of SARFAESI or IBC. So he has to understand that if he is able to recover his money with SARFAESI, he can go under that route. But if he believes that, okay, I will not be able to recover my money here, but if I invoke IBC, I will have better position in the waterfall, I will be able to control the creditors committee, then he should go there. So it becomes very, very important for banks or financial institutions who are invoking any proceedings against the defaulting company. They have to understand that whether they should invoke SARFAESI and insolvency. Insolvency has a lot of benefits. It's a time-bound process. There is a control. There is a waterfall mechanism. But if I am a lender wherein I have a specified charge on certain assets, I would very well go under SARFAESI, and maybe it may take time. The promoters that can litigate, but end of the day, I have a mechanism wherein I can attach the asset and I can sell it. So it becomes very, very important before anybody invokes SARFAESI or IBC to understand what will be their position and what will be their hierarchy waterfall in terms of recovering their money. This is more for a financial data, but for operational data, it is if the amount is more than 1 crore and if there is no dispute, it is always better to go for insolvency, because if you don't have DRT, because DRT is only for financial data. If you have to go for a commercial suit will take time. It takes 2-3 years. So it becomes very, very messy, and it's a time consuming process. So it's always better that if you are sure that the financial condition of the company is good, and if the company goes into CIRP or liquidation, you will be able to recover your money. Then for operation data, it makes sense to go under IBC. So it is a blessing in disguise for operation data, and it becomes very, very easy for them to recover the money. So that is the basic difference between SARFAESI and IBC, and anybody who is invoking these codes have to understand. Now, so once an application is filed, once the company gets admitted, the company goes into CIRP, either the company gets revived or the company goes into liquidation. Now, that is the process which I think broadly we have understood in terms of my presentation and Raghu's presentation. Now, there are a few questions maybe which needs to be answered. There could be one question which basically is asked by a lot of people. Can an application be filed against a debt which arose during the lockdown period? So when I say lockdown period, it starts from March 25th. The lockdown started from March 25th, and on March 25th, the government came with a notification saying that there is a kind of an immunity given under the IBC code for any default which occurred after 25th March, and the company cannot go into insolvency for 6 months. So that 6 months got ended on September 25th, but again the government came back and they have given 3 months extension, so it will go up to December 25th. So any default which has occurred during the lockdown, there cannot be any insolvency proceeding which can be started against the corporate debtor. So when I say default, so if you have triggered a default by issuing demand notice, or if you have already filed an application with the NCLT, then it's fine. But if there are defaults which are after lockdown, or if you want to call default, you cannot call during this period. So that will not be possible. So if you want to pursue in a commercial code, you can do it. But for any default during the lockdown period, insolvency and bankruptcy code cannot be invoked. Can an application be filed in lieu of debt below 1 crore in the event of demand notice was issued before the lockdown? So as I said, there was a limit of 1 lakh before the lockdown, and after the lockdown, the government has increased the default limit to 1 crore. So a lot of people come back and ask us if I have issued the demand notice before the lockdown, whether I can go and file an application with the NCLT. The answer is yes, because you have issued the demand notice and you have invoked the bankruptcy code, so that can be done. But if you have not issued demand notice, then the limit has to be 1 crore. So if you have issued demand notice, then it's fine. But if you have not, then you cannot invoke. The limit has to be at least 1 crore. Now, again, these are few questions which maybe will give a lot of other insights into the insolvency and bankruptcy code. So one of the question is, do home buyers fall under the purview of financial creditor under section 7 of the code? Yeah, so the answer to this is yes, the home buyer will fall under the definition of financial debt. In case if there is a default done by any builder, there are certain thresholds under the insolvency and bankruptcy code where the home buyers can invoke and drag the builder into the NCLT for invocation of insolvency and bankruptcy code. So the limits there are at least 10% of the home buyers should be part of the insolvency application, or at least 100 allottees. So if there are say if there is a small construction which has happened and there are say 50 apartments, so at least five home buyers have to basically file an insolvency proceeding. So the limit is at least 100 allottees or 10% of the entire pool who can invoke the insolvency proceedings against the builder. So that is also allowed and subject to the threshold which I have just mentioned. Whether areas of rent fall within the scope of operational or financial debt under the code. So one of the question is and what happens is there are lease agreements which are executed by companies when they are taking lease of properties. Now we have seen cases where the lessee is not paying rent to the lessor. So whether lessor can invoke the proceeding against the lessee, the answer is yes, but the matter is again what you call still not certain under the law. But we have seen case laws which specifically says that the lease rents will fall under the operational debt definition, and in case if the lessee is not paying lease rents to the lessor, then they can invoke the insolvency and bankruptcy code as they will be taken as operational creditor in terms of the insolvency and bankruptcy code. So the answer to this would be yes. Can personal corporate guarantee be invoked during the moratorium period declared by NCLT upon the admission of application under CIRP? Yeah, so I think I have already answered this. In case there are corporate or personal guarantors who have given guarantee for the corporate debtors, so the moratorium is only for the corporate debtor, but the personal guarantors can be dragged to DRT, corporate guarantors can be dragged to NCLT or DRT. The personal guarantors can also be dragged to NCLT. There is a process. So the choice that there is a choice available in case if the lender wants to drag the corporate guarantor and personal guarantors with NCLT. So that is possible. So the moratorium is only for the corporate debtor. Can insolvency and bankruptcy proceedings be initiated against a personal guarantor? I think I have already answered this. Is the Limitation Act applicable under IBC? Yeah, so if you see the Limitation Act, generally for any debt, there is a limitation period of 3 years generally, but there are different debts for different, there are different debts wherein there are different periods, but generally there is a period of 3 years. So in case if the debt is time bar, then it will come under limitation, and if it comes under limitation, then there cannot be any insolvency proceedings against the corporate debtor in the NCLT. So for this Limitation Act will also apply when we are determining whether the debt is time barred. So if the debt is time barred, then we cannot invoke insolvency proceedings against the corporate debtor, and we cannot file NCLT application for dragging the company into insolvency. So Limitation Act is also applicable. Now next is what is the standpoint of delegatory agent under the IBC. So when I say delegatory agent, what happens is in a lot of business transaction, if I am the supplier, and there is a corporate debtor whom I want to supply goods, but I believe that I have no comfort against the corporate debtor, then I may have an agent who will basically pay me on behalf of the corporate debtor, and I will supply. So I have an agent who is taking care of the liability, so I have comfort with the agent, and then I will raise my invoice on the debtor, and the agent will be discharging my liability. Now whether the agent can file in case the corporate debtor goes bad and they don't pay to the agent. Yes, that can be done because that will come under the definition of financial debt. In case if the agent has paid on behalf of the corporate debtor, and if the corporate debtor is not paying back to the agent, then they will come under the definition of financial debt, and insolvency and bankruptcy code can be triggered. Now, scheme of arrangement under Section 230 of the Companies Act during liquidation of a corporate debtor under IBC. So, if you see the code, government has also allowed once the company has gone into CIRP, and if the CIRP fails, the company goes into liquidation. So, there is one more possibility which can be exercised when the company, even though the company has been called for liquidation, there is a 90 days window wherein a liquidator, a member or a creditor can file a scheme of arrangement with the NCLT subject to the approval of whatever thresholds which are given under the law. The thresholds are in case if 90% of the creditors agree, or if 90% of the shareholders agree, then that scheme can be approved. And once the scheme is approved, the scheme has to be blessed by NCLT. So the company can be revived back. So CIRP fails, company goes into liquidation, but the company can come back to life if there is a scheme which is proposed by the liquidator or a member or a creditor, and that those schemes are approved by the shareholder, by 90% of the shareholders, and 90%, 75%, whatever. If it's meeting, it is 3/4. If it is through consent, 90%. If those consents are taken, the company can be revived back. So this is a process which is generally done in Section 230. What is the status of decree holders under IBC? Now, when I say decree holder, there could be an arbitration award which is given against a corporate debtor. Now, if the corporate debtor is not cooperating and they are not honoring the arbitration award, under the law, you can go ahead and get an enforcement by the court. but under the insolvency also you become a financial debt for the corporate debtor, and you can invoke insolvency against the corporate debtor. So decree holder will fall under the definition of financial debt, and they can invoke insolvency proceeding against the corporate debtor. So this is the entire coverage. So basically, if a creditor wants to start the process of insolvency, there are 2-3 things which they have to understand. One, what is my limit, whether there is a dispute, whether I fall under the definition of the 1 crore debt, and then what is the financial stability of the company, whether that will become a blessing in disguise for the corporate, or that can basically come with a cost to the application to the guy who is filing the application. So it becomes very, very important to do these hygiene checks and then invoke the insolvency bankruptcy code. That's it. Thank you.
Friends, do you have any questions? You guys can raise in Q&A. I see one question here. Can SMEs apply for insolvency? I mean, can a SME apply for insolvency? The SME itself wanted to file for insolvency on its own, it can do it. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, who can initiate insolvency? It can be a creditor, it can be a company itself. The company needs to have a special resolution passed by them, and you can go and file with the NCLT for admission into insolvency. SME is allowed. I mean, currently, there are couple of challenges. This whole system is going through. One is there are a little bit delays which are happening. A lot of high-profile cases, a lot of litigations are happening, and which is delaying the resolution mechanism. Resolutions are getting delayed. That's one reason. Second, as I said, the investors are not available. Who can come and buy these assets. One could be the environment is not that conducive. Second, as I was telling, a lot of businesses may not be institutionalized or professionalized for some investor to come and start running the business. Given a lot of business are done families, the promoters, individuals. So that's another challenge. Government is also looking thinking to allow a pre-pack kind of a thing. Today is the process is very, very elaborate. You get the claims and give publish for an expression of interest who would be interested, and then get the plans, evaluate. All this is taking sometimes even 1 year and more than 1 year. In the process, sometimes there could be a loss of the asset or a business. Therefore, government is thinking a pre-pack, means between the creditors and the debtors and maybe an investor or a resolution applicant, there can be a pre-packed deal, which is there overseas. That is what they are trying to introduce, and maybe that is introduced. Maybe things could become very simpler. But I mean that may not be possible for all kind of cases where there are you have large number of secured creditors, unsecured creditors, and all of that. And also there is one more thing which government is thinking for MSMEs, who are going through stress, and there could be a potential candidate for the insolvency. Government wanted to again simplify insolvency mechanism for them. A draft is kind of draft is put up for the comments and all. We are expecting that should come anytime. Today, either large company or small company, they have to go through same kind of an insolvency resolution. Smaller companies, it may be difficult, more time consuming, more costly. I think something like that may be helpful. There are a few questions here. We will take it.
Can a company or LLP
sumo to invoke the provision? Prashant,
So in terms of section 10 of the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code, the corporate debtor which could be a company or LLP, they can suo motu under insolvency. So there are some thresholds. There has to be a dispute, and there are some conditions. Subject to those conditions, under Section 10 of the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code, the LLP and a company can basically file for a suo motu insolvency with the NCLT.
The next question is on, I mean, who appoints the, resolution professional? I mean, in the case of financial creditor, it is the financial creditor who is initiating this insolvency. He has to recommend, and an operational creditor, he has a choice whether he can recommend the resolution professional, otherwise NCLT. In all cases, finally it has to be, approved by the NCLT. But who can recommend? In the case of financial creditor, necessarily they need to recommend. The whole idea is, the NCLT is a overseeing body, but it's a creditors committee who should work very closely on this, along with the resolution professional, and resolve the matter. It's all commercial decision is left to the COC to take, whether they should approve the resolution plan, they should not approve the resolution plan, what kind of criteria they want to set for the bidder, all of that.
Ravi Gupta is asking, could you share the PPT to all participants? We will do that. Post the session, we will be circulating the PPTs.
There is one more question, you can take it.
Please explain if the legal remedy liability will be exhausted against personal guarantor or principal borrower. Please explain if the legal remedy liability will be exhausted against personal guarantor or principal borrower. If I rightly understand your question, so what you are saying, in case if the company goes into insolvency, either the company will either basically go under the CIRP, or the company will go into liquidation. Post that, in case if the financial creditor is not able to recover their money, whether they can invoke personal guarantee or a corporate guarantee against the guarantors who have given the guarantee for the remaining amount, yes, they can do it. So personal guarantor and corporate guarantor will not be discharged for the liabilities for their liabilities once the company has been admitted or the company is going to insolvency. In case if the financial creditor is not able to recover the entire money, they can go against the personal guarantor or corporate guarantor. So this process will not stop them to go against the personal or corporate guarantor for any proceedings, would be full or part.
Just to add, what Prashant has said, there is a situation where there is a personal guarantee is given for the, debt taken by the corporate. Obviously, even though the corporate is, discharged as insolvent, given there is a personal guarantee, so the liability will not end. It can, the lender can come after the personal guarantor. But assuming, there is business, you have not given any guarantee. There are, tax dues or maybe employment dues or, unsecured creditors. There it gets extinguished with the company.
There is one more question, whether PE funds who have funded invested company by convertible debt instrument can approach IBC in case of default by the promoters and the company. So again, if I have rightly understood your question, if it is a fully convertible instrument, then they cannot approach. But if it's an optionally convertible instrument, then it will become a financial debt. And if there are breach of terms of issue, then they can approach the NCLT. But if it's a fully convertible instrument, even though it is sitting as debt in the books, it has to convert into equity. So they cannot.
There is one more question. We don't have any agreement between our company and debtor. Shall we apply for insolvency? This question is not very clear.
Shall I take it?
Please.
I understood the question. Will prove that there was a debt. That can be proved through your purchase orders, your mails, your invoice. So if you are able to prove that there is a debt, then it can be invoked. So having an agreement will not make not having an agreement will not make any difference. Yeah. So what will happen is you may have to put more efforts to prove that there is a debt, but that will not basically jeopardize your case. So as long as you are able to prove that there is a services or supply of goods which has happened.
There is a, another question by Mr. Mahesh Babu. When normal voting required is 51% of the majority for taking all the decision by COC, what is the rationale behind keeping 66%, 75 and 90% in different scenarios? I mean, even in the company kind of setup, we have the ordinary resolution and special resolution. I mean, which are, those decisions which are very, very strategic and policy decisions, which are impacting the, all the stakeholders, majority of the stakeholders. Idea is to get okay from the large, stakeholders, majority of the stakeholders. So something which are operational, maybe appointment of RP, maybe some expense, those can be done with the majority. But something like resolution plan approval, I mean, once it is approved, it is binding on all the stakeholders, all creditors, every other stakeholder. I mean, good to have, majority. Though we had actually 75%, and then it was brought down to 66%. Only in the case of withdrawal, the 90% of COC members is required. I mean, already company got into insolvency, COC is constituted. Therefore, without you get that kind of a majority, there is no point in going back to, from the insolvency. That's where they thought, 90% of COC, approval is required.
There's one more question which says they paid TDS and they did not pay our service amount. So if they have paid TDS, then I think you have a very good case, because paying TDS itself proves that there was a due. And in case if you are meeting all other thresholds, then the insolvency proceedings can be triggered against the corporate debtor. I think we are done with the questions.
I think maybe we can conclude. Yeah. Thank you, friends, for joining in this session. Hope this was useful, and look forward for interacting with you in the physical world, not only in the virtual world, and then more sessions to we keep doing on more sessions. Look forward to engaging with you guys in the days to come. Thank you so much. Thank you all.
Thanks. Thank you.